Herculaneum. Marian hegemony. June 16th, 48. It was a world of stark and savage beauty, with sheer cliffs and jagged peaks that rose towards the sky like jagged teeth, forming a jawline that ran 1,000 miles from start to end. One of them stuck out into the wilderness below, a gray wedge nearly 10,000 feet high, topped in snow that had never molten and crevasses of blue ice that sunlight had never touched. It was here that two men dared to climb. One was older but still in great shape, with a body honed by years of hard training and nigh ascetic exercise, his hair gray but still full, his face eagle-like and patrician. With dark rings under his eyes, sweat beading his chiseled face, he nonetheless kept his fully concentrated gaze on the task at hand, which, by now, was trying to keep up with his younger companion. Stout and unflinching in both, tackling the seemingly infinite cliff face of Mount Callisto as well as in his duty as a bodyguard, the younger man's limbs bulged with muscles under the UV-protected skin-tight climbing suit. A shock of sandy blonde hair dangled in the cold mountain breeze, sticking out from his rock climber's helmet. With trained ease, his hands and feet found the cracks and ledges to hold onto. Every 20 feet or so he stopped, grabbed a tiny hammer that was fastened to his utility belt, and drove a hook into the solid rock, creating an anchor point for the climbing rope that connected him and his charge. A blue sun, too large and too bright for comfort, beat down upon them, casting sharp shadows upon the rocky face of the mountain. Down below, the atmosphere was thick enough to filter down much of the UV radiation to acceptable levels. But up here, the air was thick with the scent of ozone, and the sparse plants that clung to the mountainside were like nothing they had ever seen before. Far below them, a forest of bioluminescent mushrooms stretched as far as the eye could see, their tops a sea of pastel colors, of pink and white and purple that would erupt into an eerie glow, casting an otherworldly light upon the landscape. Once the sun did set, strange otherworldly creatures flitted through the air below, their calls echoing across the rugged terrain. The two climbers paid them no mind. They moved with a fluid grace born of long practice and hard-won skill, their muscles straining as they made their way up the unforgiving slope. Marius' arms burned like fire, and he risked a jealous look up to Cobb Sextus. The younger man hung on one arm, his fingers dug into a tiny indentation in the increasingly smooth rock face, all while carrying all the climbing gear. The rock was dark here, almost obsidian black, and staring too long at it made his vision swim. He was slammed into his shock harness, his head ringing momentarily. Imperator buckled under the impact of the enemy's fire as the flagship of his fleet burned towards their formation at just above 2 Gs. That's the last one. Enemy now too close for effective engagement with capital missiles, TAC reported. Kill on 3 droppers confirmed. Reliability is high for hits on 7 additional bogies. Marius watched the 2 flotillas slowly converge on the bridge's central holoplot. Sitting on an elevated dais behind the captain's chair, he was nominally in charge of Marian forces. In truth, Captain Hana Ishawa ran the battle, and he was glad for it. Switch to laser batteries. Concentrated firing clusters. I see too many enemy droppers in that plot. Weapons, I want them gone. The young officer's hands at TAC darted over their console, plotting firing solutions. Even with the distant rumble of the massive ship's engines, Marius could hear the massive servos of gun turrets carrying sub-capital mounts moving to face the enemy. TAC? Tracing is good. Scopes showing solid hits on forward inbound bogies. The blurry image of a Union-class dropship trailing atmosphere and debris briefly appeared in the main plot, courtesy of Imperator's bow sensor grid. Maintain firing pattern. Scopes, where are their escorts? Unknown. Sensors lost tracking when they threw up the ECM. We've been unable to regain lock since, Captain. Our CI-3 has its hands full trying to burn away the fog around enemy capitals. Ishawa turned in her harness. Sire, your orders? Taking in the tactical plot, Marius hesitated only for a second. Order our ASF to engage. We have to punch through their naval screen to stop the main force. Understood. Comms, order Alpha to Gamma to attack the enemy. Delta is to engage any vampires they may find. With the delay, Marius saw their own ASF squadron surge ahead, accelerating to torturous 5Gs or more to quickly bridge the slowly closing gap between the two forces. 2 more enemy dropship symbols faded from red to black as Imperator's guns continued their deadly sonata. Marian ASF raced ever closer to their own engagement range, while the calm before the storm soothed the flagship's bridge crew. "Vampire! Vampire! Vampire!" 3 red globes appeared right in front of their position as Scopes' hoarse voice yelled in alarm. "Massive enemy ASF, bearing down 220 to Alpha 3. His head snapped to the captain. "LRM's inbound!" "Helm! Evasive maneuvers!" Ishawa barked. "Weapons free on all secondaries. Continuous fire from all our PD. Where the hell did they come from?" "Must have run cold once their ECM went up," Scopes responded through gritted teeth, fighting the ship's sudden acceleration. "Vampires are concentrating fire on Claudius. All ships, close the formation. TAC, slave their fire control into ours. Overlap. Radiological alert. They've got nukes. Concentrate fire too. We've got inbound. 3 vampires on direct approach. Put all our point defense on them. They're too fast. Breaking through. Impact in. Sire, get out! Get out! Fire! Sire! Sire! Marius's eyes snapped open, trying to shake off the mental haze. What the hell had that been? He'd never had a dream, a daydream as vivid as that. It was as if he could still feel the strain the high-G space maneuvers had put on his body. The sounds, the images, the stale air of his vac suit, its lingering aftertaste in his mouth. He'd been about to die, in a battle in space. A shiver ran down his spine. What was going on? Instinctively, he thought to push himself away from the looming black wall of the cliff face before a voice finally caught his attention. "Sire, is everything all right?" Cobb Sextus had stopped his climb and was worriedly calling out to him from a few meters higher up. "Yes. Yes." Marius tried to sound calm and nonchalant, and still immediately realized he was everything but. Just lost my thought there for a second. He balled his fists one after the other, hoping the feeling would somehow anchor him in reality again. "I'm coming up. Still got a long way to go, eh?" The words sounded hollow, but he let actions follow. With a strained grunt, Marius pulled one leg upwards, parallel to the rock, and reached out for a tiny ledge to use as a handle to pull himself a few feet further up the mountain. A gust of wind beat at him, pushing beads of sweat from his face into his eyes. The salty excretion burned, forcing him to blink and relinquish his other hand's hold. He realized too late that the change in balance pushed him too far away from the rock face. Strained fingers futilely tried to hold on to the small ledge, but found it far too smooth for comfort. Unable to compensate with his legs, he lost his grip and his footing. Before he knew it, he was falling. A toneless curse was cut short as he slammed into the safety provided by the climbing rope tied to his companion and fastened to several hooks above. Pain stabbed at him as the sudden drop clashed his jaws shut with force while trying to push all air from his lungs at the same time. His arm and fingers scraped across the rock, bringing with it a burning sensation immediately doused by a generous helping of adrenaline his body saw fit to release. Above, Cobb Sextus grunted, more in surprise than in hurt, as the rope suddenly and harshly pulled him against the mountain and 2 feet down. Pebbles and small rocks came loose and joined the brash of debris Marius's accident had caused to tumble down. Momentarily dazed and hurting, Marius slowly turned on his rope. Down below, a massive shadow flung itself into the air, bellowing hoarse cries of disapproval. Leathery yellow wings 20 feet across shielded a pair of arm-like chitinous claws. 2 pairs of milky eyes stared from a triangular skull ending in a 2-foot-long hooked beak, lined with blackish teeth that looked as if they could bite a grown man in half. Rows of bioluminescent tendrils sprouted from the creature's back, floating in the wind like reeds. A voice called his name through the haze of his agony. His mouth tasted of copper. Shaking himself, he spat out a fine red mist. Again, he heard his name. "Sir? Are you hurt, sir?" If Cobb had been injured from his charge's sudden mishap, his voice did not indicate it. But the concern he had shown before was back on full display. "Mostly in my pride, Cobb," he winced, his tongue not quite following his commands as readily as usual. "I could use a little rest, I guess." Grabbing the rope with his good hand to steady himself, he stared into the wide open air beneath him. "As long as that big fellow doesn't choose me for his next lunch, I'll be fine." He eyed the creature circling 100 feet below warily, suddenly all too aware that he hung freely in the air with nothing to defend him but an ice pick. Tearing his eyes off the beast, he met Cobb's look. His bodyguard already had his short-barreled needle gun out, tracing the creature's path, and the handle of the almost machete-like monofilament-bladed knife he carried on his left leg was within his reach if need be. But Cobb just shrugged. "That thing's called an angler bird. The brief said they are nocturnal hunters, mostly in the mushroom forest below. And they're picky eaters, supposedly. Are you going to shoot it?" Cobb looked past him and followed the beast. Not unless I have to, sire. Chances are it's just grumpy we disturbed its sleep. Unless we've really hurt it, we should be safe. Besides," he warily eyed the nigh vertical cliff face, "you never know if he's not going to call some friends if I try to take it down." As if to prove Cobb's point, the angler bird flapped its wings a few times, then sailed away from them and further down the mountain on the crossing winds. Maybe 200 meters down from them, 2 more yellow pairs of wings joined it. Marius felt a cold chill. The universe had lots of predators to offer, and to far too many of them, humans came just in the right sizes for quick snacks in between. "Are you certain don't need help, sire? You look mighty pale." Cobb's voice pulled him back. The Marian leader frowned. Showing weakness was one of the things Marius had been trained from an early age not to do. But here he was, 62 years old, hanging a couple thousand feet above ground on an alien planet, banged up and weary. This wasn't the snake pit of Alphard, just Marius, the man, and someone charged with making sure he stayed whole and healthy. As much as Marius let him. He sighed and held up his injured arm. It looked worse now than he had initially thought, and with the adrenaline waning, the pain was making itself felt. If the rope's good a couple minutes to recuperate, don't sound too bad right about now. Cobb shot a glance to the hooks he had driven into the rock. "That rope's not going to tear anytime soon, sir. Now let me take a look at that arm or yours, sir." With trained movements, he lowered himself down to Marius. Before Caesar could say anything, his bodyguard had a small first aid kit out, coating the wounds on the arms with an antiseptic Medigel. Far more gently than the older man expected, he placed flexible tissue meshes over the larger injuries. "Open your mouth," he commanded, then peered into it when Marius obeyed. "Hold still. This'll burn and then it'll get really cold. You're still bleeding from where you bit on your cheeks." He shook a tiny spray can. "It'll freeze the wound and congeal the blood in 60 seconds. Cobb hadn't lied. The little cloud of aerosol found every pore in his mouth like a far too hot chili. New pain shot through his head, only to almost immediately subside again, and turn into an unnatural cold. Cobb watched him motionlessly go through the stages, then nodded to himself and pulled himself a few feet up the rope again, tying his part to another hook further up. He met Marius's questioning gaze and shrugged. "Can't really look after you when you're blocking half the view. Somehow I doubt the commander of the guard would be too thrilled to hear that you got eaten by a big bird because I didn't get a good shot off." Despite the situation, Marius had to smile. No, I doubt she'd be too happy about that. He looked at his arm, then up again. "Thanks, Cobb." The man just nodded and kept watch. Slowly, Marius's cramped muscles and aching limbs lost some of their tension, and trusting in his rope, he let himself hang, held only by his harness. Pulling in a straw tucked into his shoulder straps, he began sipping on the custom-made mix of proteins, minerals, and soda he carried in a fluid bag in his little backpack. The first few sips washed down most of the blood from his gums, and then the taste of strawberries replaced that of iron and copper. Hanging freely from the rock shelter, the alien-scented breeze slowly cooling the sweat off his face, with nothing but air beneath him and a mushroom forest reaching to the horizon and beyond. He felt strangely at peace. Away from the demands of the court, of the Senate, of politics. He was not Caesar, just Marius, the man, the father. And what a great job he'd done at that, he thought with bitter sarcasm. A wave of regret washed over him, colder than any gust of wind that could reach him up here. Damn it, Sean. Why did you have to betray my trust again? He wished he didn't have to do what he had to do. For the good of the hegemony. Somehow that left an even more bitter taste in his mouth than his earlier thought. He wished... Well, what did he actually wish for? Something. Anything different. Gods. Where had it all gone so wrong, pitting father against son? Above him, Cobb sat more in his rope harness than hanging in it, one hand on the handle of his blade, the other casually stroking the butt of his rifle. Marius found himself looking directly at the man. With a start, he realized he had been holding his breath, and exhaled with a deep sigh. "Do you have children, Cobb?" Marius was startled to find he even had posed the question aloud, and even more aghast at how resigned and weak his voice sounded. "Me?" Sextus's puzzlement at being asked just that could not have been more apparent. He pondered the question for a brief moment, his brows furrowed. "Nah, none that I know of anyway. Haven't found the right person yet. Besides," he gestured vaguely at everything and nothing at the same time, "I'd have to be pretty damn irresponsible to keep a family waiting at home, doing all this here. Always on the move on short notice. Never sure if I'll be coming back home alive or in one piece. Who'd do that to a kid? A partner?" Sensing that wasn't the answer Marius had hoped for, he continued. "But my sister has 3. 2 girls and 1 boy, all below the age of 10. Bloody little rascals. They keep you on your feet, I can tell you that." He chuckled and took a hefty bite out of a protein bar he'd unwrapped with just one hand. Marius leaned back in his harness again and closed his eyes. "I don't know what I've done wrong, Cobb," he confessed. "Was there some fork in the road that I should have rather taken? Did I expect too much too soon? What could I have done differently?" He opened his eyes again and found Cobb Sextus looking at him without any of the superficial ease or joviality the man had worn on his sleeve the whole day so far. "I don't even know why I'm telling you that," he smiled wearily, not expecting an answer. But Cobb surprised him. "We're 2 men hanging on a tiny piece of rope thousands of feet in the air. Sudden and guaranteed death just one misstep away. I'd say there's no place in the whole universe you can find a more impartial listener, sir," the square-jawed bodyguard told him quietly. Marius let the words linger before he looked away, suddenly feeling both ashamed and vulnerable. "I don't know what to do about my son, Cobb," he admitted after a moment's silence. "I mean, I know what I have to do, but he's still my son. Demotion, charges, exile even maybe. The bloodsuckers in the Senate will be calling for their pound of flesh, too. Damn it, I know he's lied to me for years, stolen, bribed, gambled, but he's still my son." He shook his head, ignoring the sudden bout of dizziness the harsh motion brought with it. "Where the hell did it all go wrong, Cobb? Bloody hell." His voice rose. "The boy had everything. Since he was little, he was given the best tutors. My wife handpicked caregivers from all over the nation. Nannies with tons of experience and the best resumes. Famed thinkers, the best suited slaves to guide and teach him. Hell, I even dragged my good old Posca out of retirement," he chuckled mirthlessly. "What the hell could I have done better? Better than that? Different than that? Tell me, Cobb, what was it that my son's upbringing lacked?" The bodyguard's face was a mask betraying none of his thoughts. When he finally spoke, it was calm and deliberate. "My brother-in-law owns a bakery. My sister helps him, selling the goods and running a small cafe in their narrow house, right in front of the big stone oven. Both have long days, and he even has short nights. but they always make time for my 3 nephews and nieces. They've got no slaves, no nannies, no tutors. Just the 2 of them, and all the support and love that parents can have for their children. Sitting down with them to go over their homework for school. Taking a little time to play ball. Comforting them when they're hurt. He tilted his head. You said you did everything to make sure your son was taken care of, sir. But what if what he really needed was for you to care, personally? Not someone you paid to do so. Not some loyal slave you trusted. But you. For the things, the knowledge, the morals only a father could know. Bold words for someone without any children of their own, Marius replied bitterly, surprised at how much Cobb's statement stung, at how much he felt the need to justify himself to this pleb. The bodyguard simply shrugged. You asked, I answered, sir. All I know is that nothing may be more important than a mother or father simply proving to their kid that they do care. Family's something we take for granted until it isn't, I suppose. Tutors, nannies, advisors. You think you've won all the battles, but that doesn't mean you also won the war. Your son needed you to be present. It seems you weren't. Like a needle pricking a balloon, Cobb's words deflated his rising ire. He wasn't wrong. Admitting as much felt like mentally climbing a mountain, arduous and unforgiving. But he wasn't wrong. With sudden dread, he realized that he couldn't really remember a single time when he had played with his son, feasted on Saturnalia, or simply been a father on Christmas. To both his children, really. Keeping the Senate in line, setting myself up as the perfect representation of a Marian patrician, as the Pater Patriae, kept me occupied, Cobb. I always told myself that if I did that, it'd be the right thing. Not just for me, but for Sean as well. Setting a solid foundation so that when the time was right he could take over, he explained himself wearily. Instead, his solitary focus on matters of state had seen him alienated from his close family, including his sister. He shook his head. And look where that has left us now. When we're back on Alphard, I'll be naming his son heir. He looked back up at Cobb. I wish I could do something. Anything to close the gap between my son and me, Sextus. Things should have gone differently. It should never have come to this. Maybe I should have listened more to his ideas. Drawn him closer to me. Treated him more as an heir than just an appendix to my rule. My values. He shook his head. The boy's mother died too soon. The curse of the O'Reilly women? Cobb offered. Caesar's wife had died years ago, and his mother had not lived to see her son reach adulthood. And even his grandmother had left them before her time. Certainly feels like a curse sometimes, Marius conceded. Sean, maybe just treating him more like your son would have been enough. Cobb's voice held no accusation, only a certain finality. But Marius still looked away. I don't know. Maybe yes. I'd always hoped that there was a moment to explain to him, not just as a ruler, but as his father. To explain to him what I hoped he would do. Tell him that I didn't want things to end the way they are now bound to play out. To do things differently. But I'm afraid it's too late for this. Caesar frowned. Yes, sir. It is too late. Cobb sounded strangely sad, but before he could ponder that, the bodyguard continued. You should know that your son also wishes there was another way, and that he's truly sorry. As am I, sir. Puzzled, Marius looked up at his bodyguard again, and plunged. Too shocked to even cry out, all he saw of Cobb Sextus was the razor-sharp blade of his monofilament knife reflecting the midday sunlight, and the man already shrunk to the size of a dot. Howling air rushed by. Flailing ineffectually, he started to tumble. His heart beat so loud it drowned the whistling air. Stretches of cliff face raced by. Panic gripped his mind, preventing him from thinking clearly. He fumbled for his radio and found it dead. Think, Marius. He tried to force himself to calm down. With conscious effort, he heaved his body around, facing downwards. The wind whipped at his face. Flocks of birds passed him by, protesting his trespassing in alien chants. Focus! Slowly, with mechanical deliberation, he reached for a cord tucked under the shoulders of his backpack. After a moment of fumbling, he found the round pin and triumphantly pulled it. Nothing happened. And despite himself, he laughed. Of course, his emergency chute didn't work. Sean had chosen competent killers. Weirdly enough, that was a soothing thought. He let go of the cord and spread his arms. It'd slow his fall a bit, steady it. He felt his heartbeat normalize and the panicked fog in his mind clear. Oh, my dear Sean. His mind quickly jumped back to the conversation with Cobb. How he wished he could have done something different. So many things. Falling ever faster, he broke through the wispy cloud layer. Down below the rocky slopes and giant fungi grew larger and larger. Blood pounded in his ears. The wind cut into his eyes. Tears streamed down his cheeks. If they were from the wind, or from the deep sorrow he felt in his blank mind, he could not say. Above all, he felt a strange peace. Warmer, more earthen-smelling wind beat at his face now, and the world rushed in. A single last thought flashed through his head before he closed his eyes. Different. Then blackness encompassed him.